earth are we? Why in heaven are we here? And how to make sense of this mess of our humanness and perhaps even transcend it. Welcome, everyone. From whatever nation state or emotional state you might be in, Dawn of an Era of Well-Being is the place to tune in. We're going to deep dive into Uplift with Insight, and I am thrilled to welcome our two formidable hosts, two-time Nobel nominee and founder of the Laszlo Institute of New Paradigm Research and the Club of Budapest, Professor Ervin Laszlo, and a fourth-generation family business entrepreneur who is the founder of ITEA Institute Quantum Leadership Center, Fred Tsao. I'd like to start each episode by acknowledging our worldwide audience, for whom this is really a very challenging time. Some people are thriving, but many people are having a hard time. It's challenging, and Dawn of an Era of Well-Being podcast and the book hopes to offer real comfort to the global community. But today is a little different. As of this recording, it is the dawn of the COP26, perhaps the most consequential environmental address of our existence. You don't have to be an environmentalist to be at the effect of the weather and its existential impact on every living being. From environmental change to environmental change, we need a new paradigm to help us all realign. So before I introduce today's important guest, Roger Nelson, I want to talk for a moment about oneness, the universe, and our ultimate connection, Ervin. On page 54, thereabouts in Dawn of an Era of Well-Being, I'm quoting, I hope, chance events are highly unlikely to have created our observable universe, given this short 13.8 billion years time span. So in other words, you're saying that our consciousness and the observable cosmos is not at all an accident? It's not a fluke? Can you briefly address this? And in fact, how was this determined, Ervin?
Well, I think the proof lies in a negative evidence in a way. Mm-hmm. The old dogma, which was dominant doctrine of physics, still being taught in universities, is that the universe that we observe is the product of a series of chance interactions. Heaven's sake, don't talk about anything beyond chance, because then you're bringing in teleology. Next thing you know, you'll be dealing with some extra sensitive and extra Earth intelligence that's floating about with long beards or with white wings. So scientists are very worried about that. But the fact is that there is something more than randomness. It has been calculated that even the DNA of a fruit fly is not likely to have come about by chance variations among the various genes of a group of genes. So Fred Hoyle said that the probability of a new species arising by random interactions is similar to the probability that a hurricane blowing through a scrapyard would assemble a working airplane. You can agree that that probability exists, but it's not very likely. So I think we can actually, for practical purposes, we can dismiss it and say that it's likely to be astronomically likely, very, very likely, that there is more in this universe than chance interaction. This universe is coherent, and it's complex, and it maintains itself, and it evolves. How does this do this? What is that something? Is it a divine spark? Is it an attractor, as I like to think about it? Is it something that is reaching a heart or a brain or both? All things that we should discuss. These are all exciting questions.
Absolutely. And what better jumping off point to introduce our special guest today, Roger Nelson. Here's Roger. He's director of the Global Consciousness Project. His background includes physics and experimental psychology. He's the author or co-author of over 100 technical papers and 2 books, Connected, The Emergence of Global Consciousness, and, okay, let me try my best German, Der Weltgeist, wie wir alle miteinander verbunden sind. Oh my! That was with Georg Kindle. I really need to brush up on all my languages. He was professor of psychology at Johnson State College in Vermont, and in 1980 he joined Princeton University's PEAR Lab. That's PEAR lab to coordinate research. He created the Global Consciousness Project, the GCP, in 1997 to gather evidence of coalescing global consciousness. He is a fellow of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and he is Roger Nelson. Welcome, Roger.
Thank you, Allison.
It's wonderful to have you here.
I'd love to follow on what Irvin says. I truly believe that there is more than randomness in the universe. And one of the tools of my research for 30 years has been randomness. So, and what we discover when we ask a question about consciousness and randomness is that randomness isn't invulnerable at all. It isn't truly chaotic. It can be manipulated or changed in positive or negative directions by conscious intention. And the long-term project, the Global Consciousness Project, has been looking at randomness, asking whether there might be a little less randomness when we human beings become coherent, and especially if we become interconnected and coherent. And then just one more note. There's a third book now, another book in German, and I won't ask you to pronounce it.
Maybe we'll ask you to pronounce it.
The Weltkraft in dir, which is about the kind of powers that we actually have within us, which are waiting to be revealed, I think, to us and then to our friends and neighbors. Things like the capacity to use intuitions for our benefit, instead of saying, "Oh, nothing to that." We can learn to respect intuition. We can learn to take advantage of the fact that we are connected with each other in so many ways, including giving us the possibility of sending healing intentions. And most people do this as a kind of part of their natural being. But I think most people, if asked by a scientist, would say, "Oh, no, there's nothing to that." But the truth is that we have been praying since we learned, became able to speak and communicate at all. And why would we do that? Why would we continue to do that if it's not useful? So we have powers within us that we need to recognize, respect, and I think also to develop.
Indeed. And there's so much to uncover here. I want to backtrack for a moment just about these random generators that exist around the world to measure, if I understand correctly, the response of the collective community. And there have been certain moments through your studies where these generators really spiked. Can you talk a little bit about the nature of these spikes? And here's where I'm going. Are these spikes related to situations, events, incidents of what we call negative nature? Or are there spikes that are occurring based on extraordinarily wonderful ones? Because would this not indicate the psychological state that our world is in, or that it's geared towards reacting to at this state, this crazy state on our planet? Talk to us about that.
Okay, the thing that I believe is germane and most central to the process of our measurement, which is really just gathering of data, asking if there are correlations. In any case, that the system that we use is, I guess it's, one can say that it's labile. That means it's potentially can change in the presence of coherence. The thing that we ultimately wind up measuring is something like resonance and coherence in a space that we have to call consciousness space. One way of thinking about it is that human beings aren't just mechanical objects. We exist in a larger space than that. Our consciousness is not confined to the skull. It extends out into the universe, as far as we know, without real limitation. But back to the maybe core of your question, you asked if our system, this network of random number generators, responds only to negative events. My favorite, perhaps, event looked at every year is New Year's. New Year's is a kind of, almost for everybody, a positive event. People come together to celebrate this absolutely abstract moment. It's just an idea that we have. And yet we come together in celebration. We want to give somebody a hug at midnight, or we want to lift a glass and drink a toast to the coming year. It's completely arbitrary and abstract, and yet, because people believe they are joining together in a celebration, they do join together. They become a little closer to what the sages of all cultures have said is real, that we become a little closer to the unity that is possible for human beings. We are one, and we just don't know it.
That's profound. And I think we're starting to discover just how one we are off the heels of, unfortunately, one more true catastrophe with the pandemic. But hopefully that's inspiring real awareness that's oriented in a positive way. But it's still tricky right now. So I want to talk about some of this tricky terrain, if you will. It seems that we have a propensity for drama in our world. And drama can be very effective and interesting and engaging, but this is bordering on melodrama oftentimes, and to the detriment of large swaths of the global population and all of our psyches. In the physical domain, it's clear where I leave off and you begin. Your physiology is you, and in your human form, and mine is in mine, et cetera, et cetera. But when we get into this concept of oneness, of consciousness, does that begin to blur the lines? Where do my thoughts leave off and yours begin? And in that regard, we've often heard of two people thinking of the same thing at the same time without even knowing it, or tapping consciously into each other's thoughts, or the Akashic. Yesterday, we started to discuss a little bit in our podcast series about AI, its extraordinary potential in many industries, but also the unregulated nature of what we're diving into, and how to, I almost want to say, regulate consciousness. Do we need to even consider this? I mean, space, we're already out there in space, which is largely unregulated, and it seems like we are getting ahead of ourselves. Since consciousness is such a new concept to so many people who are waking up to this, do we have to take care and be a little mindful, if you will, about how we interact and explore?
I think you use a very important term. They're mindful. I wonder if anybody in the AI business has considered how an AI actor might be mindful. Is that possible? I think until we understand something like mindfulness and learn to capture the values that mindfulness confers in ourselves, we may be a little ahead of ourselves by setting up artificial intelligence. It's really very likely that we'll benefit hugely from AI if we use it for the kinds of things it's really good for. But I want to see an AI painting, right? Or hear an AI musical composition. The truth is, those things are happening. And we may judge AI partly on the possibility of programming of us putting our intentions into this machine so that it will actually do something like a human might. But I'm not convinced that we're ready, partly because I think you broached the issue of how fast we are advancing technologically. We are way far ahead of ourselves in technological development as large cultures, as the sort of governing bodies and so forth. We're very far ahead of our social development. If we were as good at the social interaction, cultural exchanges, if we're as good at those things as we are making rocket ships to send people into space, we'd be, I think, way ahead of the game.
Indeed, indeed. So it really is an arena with which we should approach with care. We're really infants in this respect. And Irvin, I'd like to get your feedback about this. Do you feel, because consciousness obviously is going to be our footpath towards the future, but learning how to use it or to be used by it, I suppose we should say. It's really a relationship, isn't it? Where are we in this stage of unfurling our relationship to consciousness, Irvin?
Well, we are underdeveloped in one respect and overdeveloped in another. We could do far more than we are able to manage, able to understand, to comprehend. We are far more complex than coherent. Our coherence is lagging behind. So complexity becomes chaotic after a while. It's very interesting, the problem that you raised about positive and negative. I've been thinking about it since you raised it just now. Of course, what is positive and negative needs to be measured against something. I think the best measurement is whether it promotes the unfolding, what we call evolution in this universe, or whether it blocks it, or nothing is entirely immaterial or neutral with regard to it. But some of these things are not really significantly pro or con. But there could be some events that are really very much promoting evolution, bringing us together, creating more harmony in the world, more understanding, and more living together. And some other things could be violence, could be tremendous injustice, poverty, penury, and change, stress caused by environmental changes. So there are many kinds of events occurring, and I think it would be Nelson, who's the best person in the world actually, to see whether if we could judge some of these events in terms of their positive, constructive, evolutionary impact versus their negative blocking impact, whether those would show up equally in these computers, or would they be more favored by one as compared to the other? That would be something quite interesting to find out.
That is very interesting, Irvin. Roger, is there such a setup within the mechanisms of your studies that can assess what Irvin is saying?
Well, yes.
Yes.
One of the things that we have been running this project for more than 20 years, and there were, I set a total of 500 pre-specified events that we would examine, some positive, some negative, some surprising, some small, some large. But the idea was to sample the possible kinds of things that might engage people's attention and maybe promote their connection to each other. And to ask questions like, is a positive event more powerful than a negative event? The answer to that is a little ambiguous, but one of the secondary analyses we have done is to look at categories of events. And the most heartening discovery in doing that, from my perspective, and I think a lot of other people appreciate this, is that emotions like compassion, if they are tremendous numbers of people are sharing a compassionate state of being, then our devices tended to correlate with each other. That compassion, which is is really a kind of emotion that really that brings people together. I mean, you don't do most of the time, you don't think of compassion as something you do by yourself. You share compassion with other people and love, and those kinds of emotional descriptors applied to events in the big world are the ones that have pushed our scores, which are really correlations among or between these devices, which should be random, completely random, and they're separated by thousands of kilometers. The correlations among these devices increase when the coherence and resonance of people increases. Compassion, love, and the positive interactive states are the kinds of things that bring people most powerfully together.
We need more of these galvanizing events that are predicated on something of an uplifting nature, don't we? There's been a top-heavy, media-centered, even something like the COP26, which is about to begin, which in theory really is on behalf of all of us and the best for all of us, is a highly charged event experience. I wonder what the results will be from the random generators, because this is really a rally now, isn't it?
I have been looking at events of that nature, the kind that are organized by people. For example, in India, there's the Kumbh Mela, which is a very, very big celebration. The biggest versions have 20 million people, I understand, coming together in the northern part of India to try to bathe away their sins in the Ganges. And those happen only every 12 years, the biggest ones, but there are others in between. We have looked at 4 of them. And in each case, the signature produced during the day of the greatest numbers gathering and doing their ablutions and their prayers. And those look so much alike that you can hardly distinguish one from the other. And each one of them does what we predict will happen. Each one of them shows a persistent, consistent, long-term correlation that shouldn't exist between the data points produced by random number generators, the quantum process that is demonstrating to us that there is a connection that we can bring into being purposefully, as we do at celebrations like the Kumbh Mela, but also things like Earth Day. We've looked at that also. Our system is what has to be called a low signal-to-noise system. That means that we don't always get what we expect we will, but we have to be persistent. We have to be patient. That's one of the pieces of scientific equipment that is most necessary in this kind of work, patience. So we do the same, we ask the same question repeatedly. And sometimes it's maybe, but most of the time it's yes. And when it adds up several times yes, then we have good, solid scientific evidence of this connection that we speak so urgently about.
And Roger, do we know how long after these events the tail light of these comet moments endure? Or do they just disappear the next day and we're back to our same old? Would be interesting to see if there's...
Well, Allison, you need to join our research team because that's a good question. We have to make the prescription, that is we have to say exactly what the event is, what the starting time is, what the ending time is, before we look at the data, of course. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to claim we're doing science, right? So we have, in general, set an event, even if it's an explosion, something that has a single moment in time. It isn't just there that we look, but we look a little before and several hours afterwards, generally speaking. And it turns out that most of the time, the effect of whatever the sharply focused event was does persist for hours. In other words, this gathering of consciousness into a kind of unified resonant state doesn't just dissipate instantly as soon as the stimulating moment has passed. Instead, it stays with us. It's probably an indication that we should learn something like cultural meditation.
Really, a new sustainability, because consciousness is ever present, but our relationship to it has to become more evident and sustained.
And purposeful. Yeah.
And purposeful. Such an excellent point. I want to veer us in a little different direction. And Irvin, I'm going to come back to you, Roger. I'd like to ask you, I had better read my own question because it's a little unusual. In the material world, we have laws to guide us, to govern us, if you will. Do we need consciousness laws to inform our infant state about this alternate state, given that it is so hard to distinguish between the voice of ego and the voice of intuitive guidance in the first place? You know, I think sometimes of incidents like the Capitol riots that had a ringleader in horns who felt guided to perform his misguided behavior. And we see the ramifications. Consciousness is neither good nor bad, but how do we harness this for the betterness of our collective self? Do we need a consciousness sort of law book?
Well, consciousness is something that happens, something that we can use because it means connection, and it's something that is not random in itself. Mm-hmm. So consciousness does have laws, I think, the same laws that life has, because consciousness and life are the same different manifestations of the same thing, of an evolutionary drive in this universe. They all act together. So they're intriguing questions, you know. It's very difficult to answer them on the spur of the moment. But I don't think in terms of laws. I think in terms of structures, perhaps, you know.
Yes.
There are. It's not everything is possible, even for consciousness. And so I'm always struck by the fact that, according to the physics evidence, and Nelson can say more about this if he likes, even shortly after the Big Bang, the laws of nature that regulate the interaction of quanta, or even the smallest subsidiary units, they were operative. Nothing happened purely in an empty, unbiased, immaterial and impersonal space. Everything had happened already in a structured space, as it were. If you like you like the term, use the term field or akashic field in this context. The akashic field is present, and was present predates the universe, because the universe was born as a space-time manifestation at a given time, perhaps after at the Big Bang or after. But something which happens, which is underlying it all, is something structured that Plato would understand very well, you know. As physicists like David Bohm are talking about the implicate order. So this is something that I think which already structures the way consciousness operates. Consciousness is not random. I like to use the term that Bohm brought in, which I like to use very much, which is informed with a hyphen. Consciousness as a field, something that extends beyond us, is already informed. It's not anything goes. It's something go much better than others. If we didn't have this tiny, tiny bias in the random interactions, we wouldn't have a universe today. We wouldn't have anything coherent. We would have swirling inert gases interacting randomly. So that the fact that we are here is the most blazing, shining evidence that something brought forth coherence. Something is bringing forth coherence in this life, in this universe. And that something is a guide. If we understand what that something is, then it becomes a force with which we can go. and which would be very unwise to go against, because you are digging your own grave, so to speak. You are going against the flow. There are some things that are more likely, more probable in this world than some other things. If you can measure that in terms of the interaction between a human being or group of human beings or a mass of human beings and a sensitive electronic device, that's a fantastic thing, because then you can have the so-called proof that science always asks for, and people always ask for, that yes, indeed, our consciousness is not purely random. It is structured. And of course, the same way it is, so our body is structured, but information in which we operate, the whole world of information, is already there. It has been given, and it's unfolding all the time. That's the force that the young people talk about. Force that you go with the force, as they say. Go with the direction of consciousness. I think this is what Nelson can measure, and for which we need all the best evidence that we can have to convince us that, yes, there is a better direction. There is something better than we can do than some other things.
Oh, so it's beautifully said. And it's very reassuring, isn't it, that this is not just a chaos, a random. There is some kind of order, and a beautiful order to the larger, the greater. And I think that's such a beautiful note to conclude on. What I would like to do, however, before we conclude is, Roger, if you know by verse the quote that I know you love to use from Teilhard de Chardin, the famous Jesuit priest, about fire. Would you like to, do you remember it by heart? Would you like to?
I'm afraid I don't remember it. I could only paraphrase it. But basically, Teilhard said that that we are at a point where if we are able to embody love, then we will have rediscovered fire, or discovered fire for the second time.
You are beautifully paraphrasing it, and now I will read it because it is so beautiful. and next time I'll ask you to say it in French, en français, but we won't do that this time. Here's the quote. Someday, after we have mastered the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we shall harness for God the energies of love. Then, for the second time in the history of the world, we will have discovered fire. I love that. I love that, really. And I think on that note, we'll conclude today's absolutely riveting, I feel, really riveting conversation. Hopefully we can pick this up again with you and Fred in the loop here directly. But I think at this point, I'm just going to conclude by saying, as I always do, I'm Alison Goldwyn with our hosts Irvin Laszlo and Fred Tsao, and today's very special guest, a random generator unto himself, Roger Nelson, inviting you to join us for more episodes of Dawn of an Era of Wellbeing. And to please remember, the bravado of our ego has historically gotten the better of us. When building this new paradigm for humankind, let's try to include human kindness. Stay tuned and stay attuned.
And in conclusion, here are a few words from our co-host, Fred Tsao.
The universe, or the not form that comes from the, it depends how you call it, cosmo universe, it is actually the net, the consciousness field. The consciousness field, of course, has its own nature. But consciousness field is not no movement in there. So they create this evolutionary energy that comes out and create. From the consciousness field comes the evolution energy that brings into the collective consciousness that actually split up to individual consciousness into forming into a separation, third dimensional physical form where everything starts moving, but its nature and its direction. With the energy moving out, it's also energy moving in. Evolutionary attracted and moves in. It's like you're moving your arms up. In order to control, you're moving your arms up. You have muscles that connect the body as one. It's not just arm moving, the whole body is one muscle moving. And it's a contraction and a contraction and an extension thing. That's why you can move accurately with your arm. And when you move your arm, the whole body actually is connecting to the movement. So the Chinese will understand that like this. So if one is the Wuji, which is the consciousness field, and then the Tao, which is evolution energy, and then there is the Taiji, which is the creation of form. Within that, they have the so-called virtue from heaven, which is the virtue from the conscious net, which is the nature of the conscious net to pull you back, like a beacon going home. So we can call it the conscience, the moral sentiments, the virtual nature of human, whatever we call your Buddha nature, your God image, whatever name you want to call it. There is a beacon, there's something to bring in. And a very simple thing, everybody, the human, will ask an existential question. Doesn't matter what color you're in, where you're born, what level of society. This is almost like, you have email all the time. Okay? And so whether you respond to the email, how deeply, how you respond to email, that keeps you searching from the truth. That keeps you from derailing from your nature. So yeah, there are rules to it. That's the nature of energy, the rules. And creation is always going through cycles of destruction and reconstruction, but always move towards more complicated structure, more coherency in the physical world, more consciousness, energy, and this whole thing is always seeking coherency. So is it anything random? No. Everything is an extension of this evolutionary energy, and it's going somewhere. However, human being, bear in mind, human being, there's no dog being or cat being, only human being, is the most creative being. So they have choices. So the next moment, every moment is calibrated for coherency. The next moment, we have a choice. So therefore, we can go against the evolutionary energy. We can do all kinds of things. And sometimes going against it is just nothing but the vibration of the energy in the destruction process for recollecting. So we become very separating now of individuality, so much that the individualism is eating ourselves us, like self-suicidal. And now it's an awakening because the energy has shifted. And we're now awakening. We have sustainability, we have globalization, we have technology application. All that are challenges from which we can evolve, because we evolve on the direction of challenges. So why is it significant? Well, if we continue like this, everything is not natural, everything is stressed out, Earth is stressed out, society is stressed out, family, individual, that means we're in a dying destruction process. But before we completely destroy and finish, we're now awakening, and now we're moving in the other opposition of unifying energy and unifying choice. Like you can see, it's happening into working, learning, cooking, living at home. Soon the home will be community, which we've been falling apart for a long time. And community, and yet home, it becomes your world. And so there are many of these things are happening right now in the unifying energy and in the awakening of humanity. So these are the rules, and this is the expression. Well, it's not that why it's important now. It has to happen. If it doesn't happen, it sends a virus to help us help it. So industry are localizing, that speed up AI, supply chain are disrupted so they can be reconstructed. Family that's falling apart needs to redoing. Industrial farming is no good, now becomes more community farming. Everything is going through change right now into much more integrated life and living.
Thank you for joining us. Dawn of an Era of Well-Being is a co-production of the Laszlo Institute, ITEA Institute, and Select Books. It's produced by Nora Cesar and Kenichi Sugihara, with theme music Chimera by Biba DuPont. The book, Dawn of an Era of Well-Being, co-authored by Irvin Laszlo and Frederick Saul, is available wherever books or ebooks are sold. Please subscribe to Dawn of an Era of Well-Being, the podcast, on Apple or Spotify for more fascinating guests and discussion. My name is Allison Goldwyn, founder and creative director of Synchronistery.com, a future party for the planet broadcast live worldwide. Wishing you well-being till we talk again next week.